You're listening to newsstreamingnetwork.com, home of goingsolomedia.com and WGSN-DB Going Solo Network radio, podcasts, and TV. Welcome to Divorce Coalition Live, a show designed for divorce professionals to enhance the divorce process to prevent re-traumatization of domestic abuse survivors. I'm your host, Jill Kaufman. I'm a therapist, divorce coach, and co-parenting expert. You can get in touch with me at info@divorcecoachjill.com and at my website, divorcecoachjill.com. The Divorce Coalition is a nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing education and awareness of divorce professionals and process change to create a more supportive and less traumatic divorce experience. We have united top podcast hosts and divorce professionals to create systematic change in the divorce process for domestic abuse survivors. With 23.5% of divorces citing domestic violence as a cause, we bring you expert guests, practical advice, and enlightening conversations. Knowledge is power in creating change in the world of divorce with domestic abuse. So without further ado, let's get started. Survivors of domestic abuse are frequently victims of post-separation abuse, either by their ex-partner or by institutions. It's important for divorce professionals to understand what post-separation abuse is and to help their clients as they experience it. Today, I'm asking my guests, Dr. Christine Cocchiola and Amy Polacko, to share their expertise with domestic violence to help divorce professionals better able to work with clients. Dr. Christine Cocchiola is a licensed clinical social worker and has been a social justice advocate since the age of 19 as a domestic abuse, sexual assault crisis counselor, and a child welfare advocate. Dr. Cocchiola is a trauma-trained therapist, a researcher, and an educator. She's the creator of the Protective Parenting Program, a program to support protective parents navigating parenting children harmed by a coercive controller. Amy Polacko is an award-winning journalist, investigative reporter, and a divorce coach who survived a narcissistic nightmare. After her own experience, she formed Freedom Warrior Coaching to become the guide she wished she had. Amy was part of the Pulitzer Prize-winning reporting team covering TWA Flight 800 crash for Newsday. She coached hundreds of women going through divorce, runs a support group, and writes for national news outlets. I am really excited to have these two amazing women here, and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Well, I know I gave a lot of information about you, but also you have a new book coming out that you co-wrote.
That's right.
Framed. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I'll defer to Amy. Go ahead.
Okay. It's called Framed: Women in the Family Court Underworld. And at the bottom, it says, Know the Abuser's Playbook. So it is a compilation of 22 stories of women from around the world, the US, Canada, the UK, and Australia, and their experiences, all domestic abuse victims in our family court systems. So this is something that Dr. Christine and I have been so passionate about. We work with clients every day and hear these stories, and we wanted to bring this out to the masses because we really believe that most people have no idea what's going on in family court. And to your point, Jill, people think when you get a divorce, it's over. Often the next phase of the abuse is just beginning. And I think readers will find that in every one of these stories.
Yeah, and I think it would be good for divorce professionals to read this book to just get more educated about it and understanding the feelings of the survivors. So it's a wonderful book for our audience.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I was on the phone yesterday with a colleague that I'll be presenting in New Jersey next week to over 100 attorneys. And she had read the book and she just was like, I just am having a hard time recognizing that it really is this bad. I believe you. I believe you that it's this bad. I believe that these are not anomaly stories. These stories are not an anomaly, that this is an epidemic. But she just is really having a hard time grasping that idea. And that's the world we live in. Nobody can really believe how horrifying it is and how prevalent it is when it actually is extremely prevalent. And the experiences of victims and survivors, whether they suffer physical violence or not, is excruciatingly traumatic.
Absolutely. And that's the whole point of why we're here, right? So let's start talking about what post-separation abuse is. And it could be before or after divorce, right? It could be during the divorce process, or it could be post-divorce.
Sure, sure. So I think when we think about post-separation abuse, we think of it as something separate because it happens after the separation. But really, what we know from research and affirmed over and over again is it's just a further infliction of coercive control. So coercive control is happening within the relationship. Oftentimes, the victim survivor doesn't even know it. That's the remarkable thing I think about our stories is we asked our contributors, who we are so honored that they entrusted their stories to us, these 22 brave women, but that we asked them to tell us about the beginning of the relationship, because abusers don't show up with signs saying I'm an abuser. Nobody expects to be in a relationship, and oftentimes when you're in that relationship you don't even know it's abusive until you do. And that's when the abuser will exert more power and control over the victim. So coercion and control is happening all along, but you may not notice it unless you've been taught the red flags, which again is why Amy and I wanted people to really learn about what this could look like. And then in that, it intensifies when the perpetrator recognizes they're losing control. And so then when the victim attempts to escape, and as I always say, escape is elusive because you never really escape, it continues, right? The course of control intensifies post-separation. And so we know in over 95% of cases now, new research is affirming that the course of control intensifies post-separation. So it's post-separation abuse, but it's all coercive control.
But maybe, Jill, would it be helpful to talk about the type of forms this can take, right?
That would be great.
I mean, I think one of them is harassment and stalking, right? Often, as Dr. C always says, right, this is a continuation of coercive control. They still want control of you any way they can. Legal abuse is a huge one. And we outline this in the book, is that abusers weaponize the court system, and it's allowed. They are handed these tools like on a silver platter. And I think that's what most people don't realize. We believe that when you see a court file this thick or electronically this long, you should say, as a judge or any court professional, this is an abuser, right? That's the situation here. But sadly, that does not happen. Financial abuse, like withholding, whether it's spousal support or child support. Counter parenting is a huge one, and Dr. C's the expert in that, where you can't co-parent with them. They're doing everything to undermine you. And then, another one we talk about in the stories is using this parental alienation syndrome type accusation, where the mother is accused of making up a story about her spouse or ex-spouse and turning the kids against him, which is often not the case, as we show. So there are other things they can do, but I would say those are the main ones. What did I forget, Dr. C?
No, I think that's a great compilation. I think also like financial abuse can be inflicted by having one person work more than the other person, one person contribute more. So it doesn't have to be, you're on a budget. Like we always assume that's the thing about coercive control, right? We always assume that the abuse is extreme, that it's very like it's people being locked in a room, or it's people like being on a budget, or people's like citizenship being taken away, like their green card, right? Like hiding their green card, when it can be that. It can be, but it's also extremely nuanced and extremely insidious. So it shows up in a variety of ways. Victims don't know, as Amy just expressed, like stalking, harassment. Victims don't even know they're being stalked and harassed until they do, right? I mean, you could be harassed or stalked for 15 years and not even know that the abuser's doing that. So, yeah.
No, I just had a client who the judge gave her 30 days to get out of the marital home because the abuser was so, good at convincing the judge of their side. And, this person was a stay-at-home mom, has no income, has no way to get an apartment or a house. And I think that's also like a very subtle example of the institutions, buying into an abuser's story and not really understanding the full picture.
Yeah, I think we talk about in the book a term called himpathy, which the Australian philosopher Kate Mann coined. And it is the inordinate amount of sympathy given to men in our court system. We see it every single day. I mean, we're working with clients every single day, like you are, who are seeing that. And it's something I've written about for Ms. Magazine, the way there are these misogynistic tropes, unfortunately, that are alive and well in our court system, where women are labeled hysterical and bent on revenge sometimes right from the get-go. So, I mean, if you're up against that, right, it's really difficult to dismantle that narrative that's so entrenched in our system.
Absolutely. So there's lots of examples of this. Well, so why do we need to discuss this within institutions specifically? What are your reasons for talking about this?
I mean, I think Amy, and I think many people would concur that we continue to see the systems. We could blame it on a lack of education, but there's education available, right? We can blame it on maybe ignorance, or we can blame it on misogyny. I mean, there seriously does seem to be some collusion going on, as we continue to find over and over again where there's a moneyed parent who has the ability to pay for the best people in the system that can actually support people, and so how do we unpack all of that? I think we have to hold like court professionals responsible, but the problem is that they have judicial immunity. So judges in general are given judicial immunity, and even if they behave maliciously, the law actually states that from 1607, even if they behave maliciously, they are not held to account. So we really need to, unfortunately, I think we need to infiltrate the system. That's what I keep saying. We need better people in the system who get this, but we also need to figure out how to dismantle the system, because the system itself is set up in a way that women are not believed when they express that they have experienced abuse.
How do you dismantle the system? And then what do you do when you want to get divorced? You know what I mean? Like, can you give more details about what you're advising?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in general, a lot of people say the system doesn't work, right? Let's get rid of the system. But how do you get rid of a system that has so much power in society? We have research that affirms that judges actually believe in the hierarchy in society, that they do believe they have a position of power, that they make the rules. They do actually have that belief system, right, in them. So patriarchy is endemic. So how do you dismantle a system that is actually run by, let's call it patriarchy, right? It's going to be very impossible, but you can infiltrate it. I believe you can. You create you create therapists who understand this, divorce coaches, attorneys. You shift the system by creating, like right now, it's heavy weighted on this oppression. You shift it so that there's more people doing the good work in there, but that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of work. I mean, we have coercive control legislation that we're not even seeing being used across, in the 7 states it's in. So it's going to take time.
Yeah, no, I think that though this is part of what we want to do, right, is educate all the divorce professionals, which will help the process, hopefully. Amy, you mentioned there's a story in your book that you wanted to share, that I think would
Sure, I
be.
think we both probably can, but when you were focusing on post-separation abuse, this one jumped out at me. It's actually called The Abuser's Playbook, and it's Michelle's story. She's in the United States, and I just want to read you the first line before I skip to another spot, because she said, "My name is Michelle, and I want a divorce. These are the very words that initiated my living hell." And, she's 4+ years into this. She just wants to move on with her life, but her husband does not want her to. So I'm going to skip to an area where she says, "Litigation tactics by Jeremy and his counsel have cost me immensely in legal fees and time away from work. These are bullying tactics that harm me and my children. Jeremy and his attorney do not participate in good faith settlement negotiations. We attempted mediation, but he refused to negotiate basic terms of a divorce. He had a list of extreme demands for money and assets, but would not negotiate. We write stipulations, then revise, add, and amend them with a low success rate. Jeremy has refused to allow me access to my own possessions, including photos of my own children, for over 3 years. 2 years into the process, he brought in 2 guardian ad litems, attorneys for the children, to extend the divorce process even further without good reason. The process is invasive and upsetting to the children and meant to only harm me. Coercive controllers, narcissistic abusers are allowed to weaponize our court system for their own ends. These individuals know how to go just up to the line, but not get in trouble. It is in the playbook. After spending hours in jail on bogus charges and ridiculous accusations against me, I decided to testify in my state in support of an abusive litigation bill. This is just a game to abusers, but this is my life. This is our lives and our children's lives. So, I think, especially because the audience for your show is divorce professionals, right? And we are all in that category. I hear often, well, why can't you just mediate? Oh, everything can be mediated. Guess what? Michelle tried to mediate. A lot of us would have loved to mediate. We're not looking to drag this out. We're not looking for World War III. But when you have someone who will not cooperate, you are stuck. And that's where these women are. They are stuck in a system that's allowing their abusers to keep abusing them.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so good to highlight a personal example for us to really see that through their eyes so that we understand how damaging that is. I mean, emotionally, 4 years, I mean, that's really not good for anybody. We need to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Domestic abuse survivors experience a lack of trust in the divorce and legal systems in place to protect them. Research shows that many report re-traumatization in court and reported that legal professionals verbally threatened them, mocked them, did not give them a chance to speak in court, exaggerated the survivor's faults in court, and provoked them to elicit emotional reactions. In other cases, divorce professionals may be the first point of contact for survivors with the ability to help if they recognize the signs. The Divorce Coalition is a nonprofit organization created to change this experience for abuse victims and survivors through education and awareness of divorce professionals. For more information, go to www.divorcecoalition.com, and please support us by making a tax-deductible donation at www.divorcecoalition.com/donate-now. And now back to the show. So I just wanted to discuss that example. What could we do as divorce professionals in the situation to help Michelle out?
Well, I think, one of the things I'll just say quickly is I think we need attorneys and professionals who are willing to call this out and say, this, Your Honor, is vexatious litigation. We hear so often from attorneys. And, I wrote an article about Jennifer's Law, which Dr. C referred to in Connecticut, and why it's not being instituted in our court system. A lot of times these professionals are intimidated by the judge. We need people, to her point, who are in the system, who are willing to speak out and call this what it is. Because if everyone looks the other way, we're going to have many, many more Michelles. And it's devastating, to your point, emotionally, financially, hurts the children. I mean, her children have been through a lot.
Yeah. And in terms of standing up, I mean, I get so many clients who tell me, this is what my attorney told me to do. And if the attorney isn't educated, they're probably not giving the best advice for these types of situations. So how do we help clients understand that,
I think there's an interesting, I think it's paradoxical, this idea that so sometimes attorneys will become more, for lack of a better word, they'll fight harder. They'll be more aggressive, right, to get what they think is fair for the victim, survivor, for their client. We'll just say for their client. And that can be extremely helpful. But the problem is that that can also backfire. So if an attorney is saying she's a victim of abuse and she needs to be supported and we need to recognize this abuse, that can backfire on victims. So the other side to that is that oftentimes attorneys are saying, don't mention the abuse. Don't even talk about the abuse. If you talk about the abuse, it's going to get worse. So it's really a tricky thing. And frankly, I think it depends on the judge, right? It depends on who the judge is and if they actually truly understand the character traits of these abusers, because abusers show up as charlatans. Nobody would even expect them to be abusers. I mean, most, not all, of course, some show up in ways that, oh my gosh, that's really problematic behavior. But overall, many of them show up pretty calm, regulated. They're not behaving in a way that is problematic. And in that, judges are just making decisions, frankly, to get cases off of their desk. And they're frustrated by these cases and they call them high conflict when they're not high conflict. There's only one person who is drawn towards conflict. So it really is about ensuring that judges actually care. Like I said, there's ignorance, but there's also a lack of care or concern about what is actually happening. I mean, 35% of women suffer violence in their lifetime. Violence in their lifetime. What of all the women who are suffering other forms of abuse that no one ever acknowledges? And what of all the children that are living in these family systems or living with that mother who is suffering this physical or non-physical violence? The numbers are probably pretty astounding if we interviewed.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of like the judges not being always reacting the same way to hearing that there's a domestic abuse survivor, I mean, over throughout the country, I'm sure there's like areas that are really, because I hear cases where the judge does understand that and they rule appropriately. And then other areas there's no way that, so like, is there areas of the country that are better than others, or it just depends on the judge?
Right. Like Amy will concur. I'm sure you've had this experience where people say, oh, Ohio is terrible. We're like, yeah. So it's not Ohio that's terrible. It's not your jurisdiction that's terrible. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. I did speak with a mom last week from Georgia. In her jurisdiction, 20 mothers have lost custody of their children because they expressed that they had been victims of abuse. This judge, whoever the judge is in that jurisdiction, is flipping custody as soon as a mother expresses she's been abused.
Wow.
Two things I want to say about this, Jill, is that, the thing is the data doesn't lie. I mean, Joan Mayer's study, she's a George Washington law professor, shows that when women bring up domestic abuse in divorce and custody cases, they're believed only half the time. And then we've had a recent case in Colorado of Rachel Pickrell Hawkins. I don't know if you heard about this case. It was a mom who objected to reunification therapy for her children with a man who was, charged with raping, sexually abusing, and physically abusing them. So she went to jail for 2 weekends in September, and there was such a public outcry on the steps of the Capitol there. The media nationally and internationally, social media exploded, and the public pressure put on that judge made him do a complete reversal. And I think that's really telling, because we're talking about a system that is very secretive and it happens behind closed doors. And to Dr. C's point, how do we get them to care? Well, guess what? When this comes to light, most people, if you interviewed 100 people on this walking down the street, right, would be outraged that this is happening. That's why we wrote Framed. We want more people to read this and get ticked off. So by the end, where we have a call to action, they're joining these fights to infiltrate the system, to support legislation in their state, because it really has to happen on a state-by-state basis.
Absolutely. And I mean, just the idea of something going on for 3 to 4 years, doesn't that sound like there's something wrong with that?
But we've heard worse than that, right? I mean, I'm sure we've heard 8, 10. I have a client who is, about 50 years old and looks like she's close to 70 from the stress of this every day. It's as Tina Swithin of One Mom's Battle, who wrote our epilogue, said, it's like having your own personal domestic terrorist, right? And that's really what it's like. No one should live that way.
Right. Right. And then I think that therapists, divorce coaches, the people to support these people, it's so important that they have that available to them, because going through that on your own is impossible, right? So what do you have in terms of that advice for that?
Well, I think it's so remarkable, right? That, as a therapist myself, doing this work, my entire life since I was 19, and I didn't know it was happening to me. Right. And so, because I was looking through the violent incident model, so what we really need to do is like embrace all of these allies who get it. And I think that that's key, right? I mean, I think there's people who maybe haven't experienced it. Maybe they had a loved one or a good friend experience and they get it. But otherwise, we really need people who are invested in this work, who truly can empathize with the experiences of victims and survivors. And frankly, it's difficult to do that because victims and survivors are often silenced. They're often prevented from speaking out about their experiences. And so, I mean, it's going to take a sea. I always say it's going to take a sea of allies to change this. This whole system has to be changed. And one of the things that we have stories in our book, and this is a problem that continues to arise. My original work, when I began this work, I was a domestic abuse, sexual assault crisis counselor at the age of 19, and this work is about people who want to groom other people into their lives, right? So I say that perpetrators choose their victims. They know. And that in that they also are choosing victims who have children or they can have children with, because we are seeing there's an epidemic of child sexual abuse that occurs. Predators gain access in these relationships, and trusting people who are givers in relationships, people who are not codependent, who are simply good, kind people, end up in these relationships and become harmed. And in that, the children become harmed in a variety of ways that could be also include sexual abuse. And we have those cases inside of our book. We have a mom, she got the attorneys who won the case, she lost custody. She had accused the abuser of sexually abusing her children. The children were coming home disclosing. Come to find out, it was a family systems issue. The grandfather was also an abuser, and she knew that when she married the husband. She knew that he had been abused. But they actually posted on their website, like one of those, those big yellow certificates children get at school. Congrats, you lost custody. On their website with her name. You can find it on YouTube. I mean, it's like absolutely incredible, the shaming of someone who's trying to protect her children. In what world did we switch from understanding that a mother's role, frankly, think about the animal kingdom, is to protect her children? In what world are we totally diminishing that and dismissing that? In this world, apparently.
Yeah, but we're all here to change it, and I think this is the beginning of understanding this more. It's such a complicated issue, right? And it's hard for people to really understand. So, is there anything else that we can do to help people who are, our clients who have been victims of a domestic violence?
Well, I think, to your question a minute ago, Jill, I don't know about you, but I became a coach because I didn't have one, right? And you need someone, to Dr. C's point, who's trauma informed. If someone's lived through this, you can really empathize with your clients and understand. And as you said, maybe if the attorney can't, the coach can help the client and guide them to help the attorney understand a little better. I think that is a huge role. And obviously I'm a fan of divorce coaching, not just because I am one, but I think that it's the smartest place to start, and finding someone who believes you, right? We say, what can you do for survivors? The first thing is to believe them, because so many people discount their stories, and the institutional betrayal of this. It's this secondary trauma when someone goes through this and then they go to the court system, and like I did, I was a babe in the woods, like entering a thing, it's going to be fair. I'm just going to tell my story. May not get everything I want, but I had full confidence, and boy, did I have a rude awakening. So I think that's what, a coach or a therapist in this field can help the person come to terms with that. I say that's one of the hardest things I have to do with clients is explain this is the reality, right? I've had just this week, many of my coaching clients are emailing and texting me, like, I finished Framed. I went, I didn't want to scare them, but you've got to know this. Knowledge is power, right? So I think being honest with them about this is a huge part of it. I think women have been kept in the dark for a long time in the divorce process.
Well, so one of the things that I think is also important is getting people together who've experienced this so that they can hear other people's stories. So like support groups, would that be something? I would think that would be really helpful for people because they don't feel so alone. They can talk about their stories with other people and they can feel like I'm not the only one who's experienced this.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I would say that like it's great. I think that to Amy's point, and I know that you do this work too, Jill, and I do too. I help with custody like disputes, and I do support people in the divorce process also. But this idea that you really do need to have a trauma-informed therapist who can support you and guide you through this process because the trauma is so significant. So really having a team of people, and to your point, part of that team is community. Somebody asked me recently, like, how did you figure out, like, there was a couple of books as a therapist that I read that were red flag. Like all of a sudden I started to connect the dots. But honestly, it was the online world. It was recognizing that there are so many victims and survivors experiencing this. So I always say it's threefold, right? It's like, sure, you need to have, of course, a good attorney who understands this, which is really hard to come by. We find attorneys over and over again supporting both victims and perpetrators, which is just astounding, right? But if you want to continue to be someone respected in the court system, you cannot always be going to court protecting victims. That's the problem, right? So you need to have that. You need to, if you can find someone who is able to do that for you. Of course, having someone coach you and support you through the process, so important, because again, you need to know what lies ahead. But having a therapist who can help you with that trauma and help you cope with that trauma is going to be so vital to the healing process, right? And I think what Amy says about institutional betrayal is so important because that trauma creates another layer that many victims never expect. They expect the system to be there for them, to protect them. That's what we think systems are built for. I'm going to go back to something you said a moment ago about like what can we do? What we need to do, and what we actually wrote in the book under the glossary of terms about the book being a compilation of stories about mothers as victims, since domestic abuse in all its forms is primarily a male identifying perpetration against female identifying victims. But what we need to realize is we need men on this team. We need more fathers, uncles, brothers, husbands on this team because we can't do it alone. Women do not have the same social capital in society that men do. So, you get a great guy like Jackson Katz speaking out about the macho paradox. He gets lots of people listening to him because he's a man. And so really, like, we have this book that we think could really shift things considerably, but we need men to get behind the book and get behind the stories.
That is such a great point. And there are men who are victims too. So I don't know if those are the men that we would need, but I'm sure that they could help. But yeah, any man who's willing to be on this team and work towards this goal would be a huge part of what we need. So is there anything else you want to share with our audience?
Please share this book with your loved ones. Put it on your coffee table. It's like 10 by 10. That if we all are talking about this, it's an epidemic. Nobody's exaggerating here. And so if we all are talking about it, it's going to really help to shift things. And you know what? If you think that you're immune, then you know people who have experienced this. There's no doubt about it. And if you have a daughter, if you have a niece, if you have someone younger who's just starting out in the dating world, this book is a red flag to what could happen. You read these stories, nobody went into these relationships thinking the person was horrible. Nobody did.
Absolutely.
I would just add, Jill, that, we are a grassroots effort. We have a Facebook group, Framed Book Launch Team. We would love it if people could leave us a review on Amazon. We just hit 100 reviews on there, which is awesome. And we're so grateful. So wherever you are and you're listening to this, ask your library to get a copy of this, ask your bookstore, give it to a friend, suggest it on social media. Every little bit counts. We're so grateful to the women and also Dr. Ramani, who wrote our foreword, and we owe it to these contributors to get their stories out. They gave us their stories and trusted us because they want change, right? And so anything you can do to share them, we would be forever grateful.
That's awesome. We will definitely work on that. And so we have your websites. Why don't you just say, each of you, how people can get in touch with you?
Sure. You can get in touch with me on my website. It's freedomwarrior.info. And my Instagram is at Freedom Warrior Tribe. I'm going to put our book website in the chat. I don't know if it will show up there, or it's narcfreepress.com.
Great.
Yeah, and I'm at courseofcontrolconsulting.com. And yeah, I mean, we're so grateful that you invited us on and that you want to have this conversation. It's such an important one. And yeah, we need to be hopeful that things are going to begin to shift, because it's powerful. Words are powerful, and we hope the words in this book are powerful. We do have a trigger warning because we know it can be disturbing and unsettling, but yeah,
it's important, even
Mhm.
if it is. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for being my guests today. This is really an honor for me to talk to each of you and to share your information with our audience. And to my audience, thank you for being here with us on this episode of the Divorce Coalition Live. If you would like to listen to this episode again, you can find the link at divorcecoalition.com live show tab. All of Christine's and Amy's information will be available in the show notes. And we have a special gift for you, our listeners, a free ebook called Stop Condoning Domestic Violence. And you can get that at www.divorcecoalition.com/stop-condoning-ebook. I so enjoyed being your host. Again, I'm Jill Kaufman, and you can get in touch with me at divorcecoachjill.com. And you can find the Divorce Coalition at divorcecoalition.com. Please like and share our Instagram page, which is at Divorce Coalition Page. Join us in the fight to change an abuse survivor's divorce journey. Stay tuned for two Tuesdays from now at 11 a.m. Eastern for another episode of the Divorce Coalition Live. Until next time, help us spread the word that divorce needs to change to create a more supportive and less traumatic divorce experience.